Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Mr. Productivity Podcast. I got a great guest on the show today. We're going to talk about attention management. And if you're watching this on video, I'm not talking about being attentively scrolling on social media. I'm talking about being productive. But before we get to our guest, please head on over to my website, mrproductivity.com. Sign up for my email newsletter, get some free training from me and weekly tips, mrproductivity.com. Maura Thomas back on the show, and I am so excited to talk to you today about attention management because we live in a society where everyone's spending their attention on something. Unfortunately, social media has got so many people in the grips of endlessly and mindlessly scrolling, and I know that's not the only place we're going to dive into. But I'd like to start there, if we could, about this addiction of our attention being sucked away by social media.
Yeah, it's all technology, right? It's our devices. It's the success metric of technology is how often do people come to it and how long do they stay when they get there. So technology companies are working really hard to get our attention and keep our attention. And so I believe that attention management is not only the secret to being more productive, which to me is achieving more of what's most important, but I believe attention management is really the secret to life, and we can talk more about that. But we have no hope of controlling our lives, our productivity, if we don't control our attention, and we will never regain control over our attention if we don't control our technology.
Why do you think, June 21st, I'll be 59 years young, and I grew up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We didn't have cell phones and computers. I remember the big thing for me in high school, 12th grade, you got to go in computer lab and use Apple II computers. We didn't have all this stuff. We didn't have satellite TV. We certainly didn't have social media and streaming. So why do you think here in 2024, why are we wasting so much time spending and wasting and putting our attention in the wrong areas? Is it something that we become lazy, we're undisciplined? What do you think the reason is?
Oh, I think the reason is absolutely because technology companies are making it really hard to make it super appealing. It's like a party that never ends, right? There's always something happening out in the world. When we really stop and think about it, it's things that are happening to people we in most cases don't know, probably will never know. How much do we really care? In the moment, it feels really important and we really should know. And there's all of these sort of techniques that are designed to pull us back in. But in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter for most people. What I tell people is if you feel better after your time on social media than you do before you went on, then you should use it. But I think when a lot of people really analyze how social media makes them feel, it's not a net positive in their life. And if it is, like I said, if it is, you should use it. But I think it's really important to take a look at that.
I agree with you. And I think people are escaping. I think it was Seth Godin a number of years ago. He said, instead of going on vacation to escape your life, why not create a life that you don't want to escape from? And I know a lot of people are constantly on their phones. And I've heard all these hacks, make your phone grayscale, delete the apps in your home screen, put them in a folder. But I think it has to come to discipline. Like my phone does not control me, I control it. So when I go on TikTok, I'm not scrolling on TikTok. I'm sorry, TikTok, I'm not doing it. I'm looking at my analytics. I'm maybe posting something, then I close the app. Most people can't do that because they post their content and they're like, I'm here. And then 4 hours later, they're still on TikTok. And to your point, it's designed that way. So the endless scrolling was created by social media. I keep telling people, social media is not your friend. You have to be very diligent on it. And I don't believe we should blame Apple or Facebook or Meta or TikTok. We need to take responsibility. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think it starts with making a decision. I'm going to be more cognizant of where I spend my attention, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on social media. Do you agree with me? It's got to start with a decision.
Sure, but I also think that we can be forgiven for, I wouldn't put the blame. I don't know. I think social media companies do have some blame there's blame to go around because it's all about eyeballs. They're in business to steal attention. And so they're working really hard to hook us on their technology. And so it's difficult to be like, it's our own fault if we don't turn it off, because the world is literally conspiring to steal your attention from you. And big technology companies have all the resources, all of the psychology. They're working really hard to figure out how to get our attention and keep our attention. So I think it was a real understatement when you said it's easier said than done. It is way easier said than done to just be like, don't do it. And I think even now it's starting in young people. The most important thing for young people is to fit in and to do what everybody's doing. And so once they get it, it's a lot like cigarettes. Once they get us, right, at a young age, then you're hooked, and it's really hard to go back. And it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge.
I think it's interesting because right now in the United States, there's this pending TikTok ban, or unless they sell it to an American company. But I like how Gary Vaynerchuk puts it. He says, even if TikTok is banned, that attention's going to go somewhere. So it's not like that attention's going to evaporate. It's going to go on Meta. It's going to go on YouTube. It's going to go on X. It's going to go on Snapchat. It's going to go someplace. And I think people need to understand that I remember when LinkedIn was new. I remember then it was Twitter was new, when Facebook was new, and then Instagram came along, and then TikTok came along. So these platforms are going to keep coming and going and buying each other out and taking your attention. And I think if you're not aware of it, maybe I should have asked that question of you first to see, is it a question of awareness? Because I think a lot of people, from what I've seen in my own personal experiences, they're not even aware they're spending hours on these devices, which of course is by design. So I think it's got to start with awareness. Would you agree with that?
You can't change a behavior that you don't know you have. So awareness is really important. And I love the movement that Jonathan Haidt has started with his book, The Anxious Generation. And he's talking about parents banding with other parents in schools to get their kids off of social media when they are off of their phones when they're together, right? If kids come over to your house and you ban phones, no kids are going to want to come over to your house. But if all the parents say no phones in the house after school or whatever, then everybody's in the same boat, and then the kids will get back to being together. I think adults can do the same thing. The people in my life know that I'm certainly not perfect, and they hold me accountable as well, but we make an intentional choice to not have our devices or watches or whatever around when we are together so that we can maximize time together. And so I think that the more you band with the people in your world to minimize the amounts of time that you spend on your phones, at least when you're together, then you can strengthen those social connections. And once you have stronger social connections, then perhaps you feel less compelled to spend time on social media. And then it becomes a reinforcing cycle instead of a downward spiral.
I reflect back when I went to school. Again, we didn't have cell phones. And if my mom had to get a hold of me, she would call the office. They'd have one of the office aides go to my classroom. I would walk down the office and talk to my mom on one of these corded phones that was attached to the wall. And so I don't understand these kids where some school districts are starting to say, hey, you get to school, put your phone in your locker. And they're like, but I'm like, I made it just fine through school. I did not need to be on my phone all the time. And now you go to stores and you go in line and the checker's on their phone texting or something. And is it really that important? And I've talked to some of the management of these companies, and they're having trouble getting people to show up for work because the generation that typically works, this is what the manager told me. This is not my opinion. This is what the manager told me. That generation is they'll come into work unless something better comes along. And they won't even most times call in. They'll just won't show up and they'll go to the party. And I'm like, are you serious? That's what they're dealing with. So they know if they clamp down on the kids and their phones at work, which to me, I cannot understand how people can have phones at work when you're supposed to be working. They said those people won't come in at all, which means they won't have people to somewhat take care of the customers. So I think this is more, it's a bigger problem. I think a lot of people recognize the older generation. I'm talking 80s and 90s. They go, all these young kids, but social media is not going to go away. Our phones are not going to go away. And we need to find a way to coexist with them where we can be on them when it's time to be on them. But we also need to say, okay, let's watch family movie night, but we're not going to be on our phones or our tablets. We're just going to watch the movie as a family.
Yeah, that's another thing that Jonathan Haidt's movement is trying to do, is encourage schools to ban phones during school time. If you have a break between classes, or if you're at lunch or something, you can see if your parent texted you or whatever, but during class time, no phone. I think that we need help. If we rely exclusively on discipline, individual personal discipline, it's really hard. It's really hard to manage that behavior, especially if you're in a community where phones and devices and social media are the norm, and being on them not being on them makes you different.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always say that technology is a blessing and a curse. And I often tell people I control my phone. It doesn't control me. But that's not to say that there's not times I pick up my phone when I shouldn't be. I don't want people to understand, oh, it must be nice to be Mr. Productivity. He never gets tempted. I do get tempted. I'm a human being. And there are times where I'm watching a sporting event and I'm like picking up my phone. Why am I picking up my phone? I'm watching the TV. Or if I'm with other people. Now, if I'm with other people, what I've begun to do, I said, hey, do you mind a second? You just said something that I want to remember. And I say, I want to make a note of my phone. I'm just going to make a note of my phone. So I'm letting the person know I'm not going to check Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and messages. I'm going to do this one thing. I think if people do that, I won't talk to someone if they're on their phone. If we're having a conversation and they pick up their phone, I stop talking. And they'll go ahead. No, I want to see your eyeballs. Because if we're in person, we're face to face and you're not looking me in the eyes, I don't care who you are. You're not really paying attention to me because you're on your phone. You're getting that dopamine hit from the phone, and I'll wait for maybe a minute. If you keep looking at your phone, I will literally walk away. And most times they don't even realize I walked away because they're so into their phones. And I'm not talking kids. I'm talking 50 and 60-year-old adults.
It's a challenge. I think that it is damaging relationships in so many different ways. And I think part of what we see in society, the challenge with people connecting and getting along, and there's a loneliness epidemic, and there's just so much going on. And I think it has a lot to do with social media. As we're talking, Mark, I'm starting to feel like we sound really old.
That's a good point, and I will tell the audience, like I said, June 21st, I'll turn 59. I plan to live to 110, which means I have 52 years left, so I've got a ways to go. But I have an interesting question based on what you just said a couple minutes ago. I just recorded a short video for social media, but I want to ask you this question because whenever I ask this question to people, they very rarely, and you may be the outlier here, have an immediate answer. Do you think it would be more difficult for you, Maura, to be transported back to 1924 or to have someone from 1924 be transported to 2024? Which of those two people do you think would have the most trouble assimilating to society?
I think going back in time would be much harder than coming forward.
Why do you say that?
Because it was such a different time. I think that it would be mind-blowing to recognize the technology, the advances, and all the things that are happening. But going back, I'm pretty independent. I'm pretty outspoken. I think that although we have slid backwards in some ways, I think that individual rights and freedoms for women and minorities. It's just it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. And I know that my mouth would get me into trouble in the 20s. If back in a time when women were supposed to know their place, that would be super hard for me, because I believe that a woman's place is anywhere she wants it to be.
Maybe I should have asked the question differently. I mean, in terms of the social media and the streaming services, all the places now in 2024 that are sucking away our attention, obviously they didn't exist back in 1924, but these people still had distractions. I don't want people to think 1924, 1824, they still had distractions back there. They just didn't have our distractions.
But did they? I'm old enough to remember when all that you had in your office was like prior to me, there was a desk phone and a typewriter. When I first entered the workforce, the internet existed, but it was like DOS. Like the computer systems were on DOS, and there were like networked computers, and there was some email and stuff, but it wasn't all that widespread. So you go in your office, you put your phone on Do Not Disturb, you close the door, you've got a lot of control. I suppose there are other things, but nothing like today. Nothing like today.
And I remember when at midnight, is actually, I think, Johnny Carson, I'm really dating myself now, they would play the national anthem, and then there'd be programming until 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, when people say there's nothing on, I'm like, there's like a billion things on television now. You got so many streaming services and all these pay-per-view movies. How could there ever be there's nothing on? There's nothing you want to watch, but there's always something on. And I just, I think I'm at and you as well, a very interesting point of time, because we were alive when this stuff wasn't around, and when fax machines were really big, and then when social media started coming out, we've seen it. And even though I lived through it, I look back on it and I'm like, wow, that we used to live without cell phones, without, we could watch whatever we want, whenever we wanted to. We could listen to like podcasts, which weren't even a thing back then. Instead of going to the record store and buying a record and playing it on a turntable. That's how old I am. I remember doing all that stuff. So I think we need to appreciate the technology we have. But this is called the Mr. Productivity Podcast because it's about helping people be productive. So let's get a little tactical here, Maura, because you've written 4 or 5 books, and one of your books is about tension management. So what are some really tactical ideas that someone who's listening to this conversation are like, you know what, I'm really struggling with focus because my attention is on social media? What kind of suggestions would you give them?
Yeah. Let me just add one more thing before we move on to people who are a little bit younger. I'm a little bit younger than you, but people say like under the age of 40, right? They don't really know any difference. And I think it's a big deal to not know what you don't know, right? We get used to things and we think we want it. But I can't tell you how many clients I talk to who are exposed to my work, and then they expose their younger kids to my work about managing attention. And kids, like if a parent takes a phone away, for example, from a teenager, they throw up, right? And they think that they want it. But I can't tell you how many times I have heard after that period ended, if it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, right? The kids are like, oh my God, that was amazing. That changed my life, right?
Wow.
Because they are under so much pressure to be connected and to participate in all the things. And they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what it's like without it until they experience life without it. And so that really makes a difference. Not knowing what you don't know, I think, really makes a big difference.
And before you give us some tactics, I want to talk real briefly about the 3-dot syndrome. That's when you're on WhatsApp, you're on iMessage, and you see those 3 dots, and then they go away. We have that now with Apple, what they do is if you're typing a really long message after 20 seconds, it goes away. So you're like, wait a minute. And that's how microcosmic, that's probably not a word, That's how micro we've gotten here. We're just like, what's more? What happened to Maura? I'm waiting in bated breath for her message. That's how crazy it gets. And I do that myself because they all had that messaging three dots. I call it the three dot syndrome. And it can paralyze people because you're sitting there looking at your phone. That's all you got to do is you're waiting for that.
That is a technique to keep you engaged while the other person is typing. Without the three dots, you just type what you have to type and then you put your phone down. But if the three dots come up, then you stay engaged in the thing. That is one of the many techniques that the technology companies use to hook us in.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's get to some taxes because I know people, when they saw the title of this episode, they're like, oh, do I need help with my attention? So let's give them some suggestions and tips that they could take and implement in their lives so they can begin to extricate themselves from endlessly scrolling on TikTok and actually get stuff done.
Yeah. So I think first thing is that we need a couple of things. Number one is, I think the definition of productivity matters because we've got hustle culture and people are like, oh my God, check things off, do more. And that is not at all how I define productivity. There's a specific definition in the dictionary that is achieving significant results. So to me, being productive is how much progress you make on the results that are significant, important to you. It's not just checking things off for the sake of it, right? It is, do you feel at the end of the day like you did something that mattered? And maybe that thing was visiting your aunt in the hospital, or maybe that thing was an important thing on your to-do list, or maybe that thing was soaking in the vacation that you're on, or whatever it is, right? But you feel like the day meant something to you, or the hour meant something to you, or the week meant something. Right? That you will remember it and it will matter and it made a difference to yourself or to other people. So to me, that's what productivity is about. So I think if you think about it, when I challenge people to think about it like that, then it starts to become more important and that can serve as a motivation to change some of the behaviors. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if we really do want to achieve more of what's important, then we need to recognize that time management is really, it's a misnomer. It's holding us back. This idea that we should frame our productivity in terms of time management, I think it's outlived its usefulness because our biggest challenge is not that we don't have enough time. We've all had days where we said to ourselves, oh my gosh, that was such a good day. I got so much done. And we've had days where we said to ourselves, oh my gosh, I was busy all day and somehow I got nothing done. And in those two instances, you have the same 24 hours, right? You didn't have more time one day and less time another day. So not having enough time is not our problem. Our problem is that we have too many distractions. And you can't solve a distraction problem with a time solution. The antidote to distraction is attention. And so I believe that it is really important because you talked about awareness, right? I believe that the more we use the phrase attention management in place of the phrase time management, the more we raise our awareness of distraction. And the more our awareness is raised about distraction, the more likely our behaviors are to change. If you start to, what I tell my leadership clients, if you start to say the phrase attention management and you start to write it in company information and policies and you talk about it in meetings, then you are saying to people that you value thinking, you value undistracted presence. And that is an important and valuable thing. And when you use that phrase, it keeps the awareness about distraction high. And so then people start to recognize not only how distracted they are, but they also start to realize how distracting they are. And what my clients find is that behaviors start to change. People start to, if you see somebody sitting in their office like this, what do you, right? What somebody might think seeing someone in their office is, oh, this is great. They're not doing anything, right? They're not typing. They're not talking on the phone. They're not in a meeting. They're not doing anything. Now is a great time to interrupt them. But if you're using the phrase around the office, around the house, attention management, then when people see you staring into space, tapping your chin, then they're going to think, oh, you know what? Mark's lost in thought. Maybe I shouldn't distract him right now. And so people start to think twice about sending that chat. Hey, do you have a minute? People start to think twice about jumping up from their desk and running down the hall and, oh, I just saw something that I need to tell you. Do you have a second? No, just hang on, because I'm right in the middle of something.
I just want to interject here real quick.
As you said,
I had a
really
client
important.
once who, I don't know why the company did this. They were an HR director, and they put her office was completely enclosed by glass. So everyone could go by and tap on the window and wave. And I'm like, that is absolutely insane. And she was interrupted all day long. Sometimes they didn't come to the door. They just knock on the glass wall just to wave to her. And so she's busy, and then she keeps looking over, and it's almost as distracting as having your notifications on your phone go off all the time. And I just, like, I think the wrong person's is my client. I think I need to have whoever created an office for you as my client.
Yeah, I have a chapter in my 2017 book, Work Without Walls, about how to, if you can't redo your entire office, how to take those offices that were made really without any thoughts. Because 5, 10, 15 years ago, it was like, open offices are the thing, take down all of the walls. Everything should be glass and open space and high ceilings, and we should be able to collaborate and talk to each other. And nobody thought about at the expense of what?
Yeah.
Right? At the expense of what? Collaboration is a great thing, but not if it completely eclipses efficiency and effectiveness and productivity and attention. And typically it does. So yeah. So frost the film. If you have glass walls, just invest in that film. It's really inexpensive, and put that frosted film on the glass so that people, and then also change your office orientation so you're back to the windows and the glass if you can.
Unfortunately for her, it was literally on all 4 sides, and her door was glass. And I'm telling you, when she told me this, I was like, that I didn't know how to help her, because no matter where she turned her desk, there'd be, because I guess the way she explained it, people could walk by the one side, the back side, and the front side. I think the one side went out into the parking lot, but 3 sides, people could walk by her and interrupt her. Now, if you're listening to this podcast and you are a leader and you have offices like that, please have a meeting about this, because like you may not realize how much this thing infecting and affecting your workers' productivity.
Yeah, it's one of many things that you can do if you're stuck in one of those spaces that was created without any thought to undistracted deep work, as Cal Newport calls it. There are many ways to change that. Lower some ceilings, add some, everything is like hard metal and concrete, add some like rugs and some curtains, and that helps to absorb sound. Some frosting on the glass, maybe some desks on wheels so that people can move to be together when they need to be together, but then also move to separate when they need to do independent work. If you have no private spaces.
What I told her to do is, she really needed to be undistracted. Go to someone's office. Maybe they're not there that day, they're on vacation, or maybe the conference room, because usually conference rooms only have windows at the one end. And unfortunately, this particular company had offices or window walls facing the hallway. But she did take my advice, and she did go to some offices of people that are lower down the rung that only had all walls. And she goes, an hour in there is 8 hours in my office, because she shut the door, which was a wood door, and she was completely surrounded. And I told her, the only person that should know where you are is your executive assistant. And she did that. And she goes, it was like a eureka moment. But unfortunately, she couldn't do as much as she wanted to. But when she went in there, as you can imagine, no one knew she was in there but her executive assistant. She didn't bring her cell phone in there. And she got so much work done, as I'm sure you can understand why.
Yeah. Distraction distraction is so insidious. And it's not just distraction, it's constant distraction, which is what we have, right? If we have it, if we allow it. And to what you were saying earlier, it is the way I like to think about it is that it's not our fault if we can't control our attention, but it is within our power to control our attention. And it is 100% up to us whether or not our attention will be stolen. We have the power. We just have to claim it. And so I usually talk about 3 primary ways to control your attention. One is your environment. Like you said, change it if you have to, but use signals and signs, right? Do not disturb, red light, green light, whatever. Although don't use a yellow light, because what does that even mean? Does it mean stop? Does it mean go? What does it mean? Yeah, so the lights, whatever, any kind of signal will help you control your environment, but you also have to really honor the signal, right? If your signal is up, if it's a sign or a flag or a light, a red light, and somebody ignores it and interrupts you anyway, hey, sorry, but do you have a second? I'm sorry, I really don't. If you could please come back when the sign is down, the flag is down, the signal is green, whatever it is. Because if you aren't serious about it, nobody else is going to be serious about it either. And what I tell my leadership clients is that you have to empower your team to control their own environment. And then the boss has to honor it. Don't take what I call the boss prerogative, right? I can see they're busy, but I'm the boss. And whatever I have to ask them about is really important. So I'm just going to interrupt them anyway. So controlling your environment, take back control over your environment. What I tell people is you have way more control over your environment than you probably think you do, than you exert, right? So controlling your environment. The second thing we've already talked about, right? Controlling your technology. There's all kinds of ways, right? Do not disturb, removing the social media apps, signing out of them, the monochrome, the moving things to the deeper pages, all the ways, right? All the ways. The do not disturb feature, power off. And there's also other things too. Like a lot of people forget about things like autoplay on streaming services, right? Autoplay is one of those techniques that is just designed to keep you there. Oh, watch the next episode because it's just going to automatically start. And so you'll be sucked in and then you won't get any sleep and right? Watching for all those techniques, the 3 dots, right? That's a thing to keep you engaged in whatever that app is. All of those little techniques that the technology company is using. And that's the thing. Technology developers now aren't just learning programming, they're learning behavioral psychology and cognitive science and all of this kind of stuff just to rope us in. But there is hope. Because nobody can interrupt us through our technology unless we allow it. I had a client that said to me once, my customers know when I'm going on vacation, but it doesn't matter to them. They just email me the whole time I'm gone. And my response to that was, how do you know? Get it? Nobody can interrupt your vacation unless you allow it. If you're checking your email on your vacation, that is not your work invading your personal time. That is you inviting it in. So again, back to the theme, right? The power is in our hand.
I want to interject. So we have a contractor who's doing some work on our house, and his health is failing because he allows himself to be called from sunrise to sunset, 7 days a week. A couple days ago, he had to go to the emergency room because he was bleeding out of his ears. Never a good sign when you're bleeding out of his ears. And I told my wife, who was doing the most of the communicating with him, I said, here's what Dr. Mr. Productivity says. I'm not a real doctor, by the way. I said, for 2 days, turn your phone off, sleep whenever you want to sleep, binge watch Netflix, and just relax. And he did it for 2 days because I'm like, you're a contractor. If someone's house is falling apart, they shouldn't be calling you. They'd be just calling like the fire department or something. he did it. And he says, oh my gosh, I haven't slept that much in months. And I said, you have the control. You say, listen, I understand you're my clients, but I'm not going to be available 24/7, 365. And now I hope he begins to do this every weekend because he's got some health issues. He used to be in the military services over in England or Scotland or something like that. So he's got some health issues. I'm like, you only get one life, and you have got to, first of all, you got to set the expectations for your clients that I will reply to your messages maybe between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., Monday through Friday. And if you call after 3 o'clock, unless it's an emergency, I'm not going to get back in touch with you. That's what I do with my clients. I set expectations. They had no expectations, so they literally thought, I guess he was AI, and they can call him anytime they wanted to. But you got to set those expectations. You got to be okay with saying no. No, this is not good. I'm spending time with my family. He said he took 3 days off last year in 2023. Like one was Christmas. I think he went away for vacation for a weekend. And then one time he went on vacation with his ex-wife. His ex-wife divorced him. He went on vacation, and as soon as they landed, there was a problem back here in Houston. He got back in a plane and missed the vacation and took care of an issue. He didn't set boundaries. He didn't set expectations. And I'm hoping, because I gave him some free coaching, you should have given me a discount off my construction. But anyway, I told him, you got to set boundaries and tell people, I am not your butler that's here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I have a life too, and especially with his ongoing health issues. So this goes right along with everything you're sharing with us.
And if we want to have a successful business, if we want to have a happy life, right? If we want to live a long time, then we have to make the best use of the resources that we have available to us. And our most important resources are not our time or our money or even our attention. Our most important resources are our body and our mind. And if your pursuit of success or productivity comes at the expense of your physical or your emotional well-being, it is ultimately destined to fail. And so those small business owners, I think that because I'll put myself in that category, right? We, in many times, overestimate the benefit. Oh, if I'm super responsive to customers, I'll get more business, I'll be more successful. If I'm available all the time, if I'm very responsive, then I'll just have this thriving business. But they underestimate the cost. What is it costing him to have that? And wouldn't his business be more successful if he were healthier and if he had more energy and if he got more sleep and he really took care of himself? So I think it is a real, we don't, the way that we view it is skewed. Oh, people are demanding and I'm a small business owner and I have to be available all the time. And what I tell my clients is challenge your assumptions. Right? If you are operating under this belief that I have to do it this way because then I won't be successful, or because I'll get fired, or because if I didn't, I wouldn't have any customers, or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Discover that belief and then ask yourself, is that really, A, do you really believe that thing?
Yeah.
And B, is that thing really and evidence-based? Is it true? Because it's easy to say, oh yeah, if I didn't get back on that plane, my business would have failed. Would it?
Yeah.
Would it? I don't. So yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I just want people to hear what you just said, because there's countless productivity experts, time management, attention management, lots of coaches out there, but the individual has to step back and go, okay, based on what I heard Mark and Maura say today, what changes do I need to do? See, when you're in the forest, like the saying is, you can't see the trees. And I think I encourage people, go someplace quiet. Think about what we said. Go someplace quiet and maybe get a journal, maybe get a notebook and say, okay, what changes do I need to make? Become aware and maybe come up with your own game plan. I don't know about you, Maura, but for me, when I need to get clarity on something, I go get a journal, go someplace quiet, and I write the question at the top, and I just start writing answers down, and the answer comes up. And what's amazing is it's usually the small things that give me the biggest results. So it's not like buying a new house, but maybe I get a can of W-40, And this is a bad example, but then I squirt the hinge that's making noise. So a lot of times, and tell me if this is different for you, small changes give you more bang for the buck than big changes. And they're probably easier to make as well. Would you agree with that?
Oh, for sure. I would agree 100% that they are easier to make. Sometimes you get a ton of bang for a buck with a small change. Absolutely. But the small changes add up to bigger changes over time. So yeah, I'm all about incremental things. It's very hard to just do everything differently all of a sudden, right? Even I wrote an article for Forbes about defining, and words matter, right? The words that we use create the world that we live in. And and that's why I think the words attention management instead of the words time management make such a difference. But I really think that so many things need to be explicitly defined. And that's why I talk a lot about the definition of productivity that I use, because then it seems more important when we use other words like emergency, right? Don't bother me unless it's an emergency. What I tell my clients is there's no such thing as a productivity emergency. So I'll get back to you on Monday.
Yeah.
There's really nothing that needs to interrupt my vacation or needs to interrupt my weekend that can't wait until Monday. So I tell my leader clients, when you tell your employees, or another one that is so popular that everybody uses, and I think that we really need to stop and think about, what do you mean when you say that? And that phrase is open door policy.
Oh.
I tell my leaders, when you say open door policy, people think that they aren't allowed to close a door, or they think that it means anybody can interrupt anybody at any time for any reason. And so it's not that you can't use the phrase open door policy, but you have to tell people exactly what that means when you say it. And everybody has to be on the same page with the words that we use. And there's a whole list of 10 words in that article that I wrote about. You need to say what that means if you're going to use it.
I used to work for a factory back when I was going to college, and they used to have a saying, a lack of planning on your part does not necessitate an emergency on my part. And I remember every Friday afternoon, I would go crazy filling all these emergency orders. It got so bad that the company finally had to say, okay, we'll ship the emergency order, but we're going to have a technician show up tomorrow at your location to help with the emergency. Amazing, because they were going to get charged like $5,000 or $50,000. It's a high net thing, high value thing.
Yeah.
Amazing. The emergencies dropped like a rock once they did that, because the company's going, wait a minute, we're here all week. Why are you waiting until Friday at 3:00 in the afternoon to ship everything out? So sometimes people have to make decisions like that.
Yeah. So defining what an emergency means. And I've gone through this exercise with many of my clients about when you say emergency means it cannot wait, drop everything right now. Because when I tell people, like, close out your email for an hour so that you can get some real work done. And, somebody will email me with an emergency. Okay, is it really something that can't wait an hour or 2 hours? Drop everything now. And when I challenge my clients and we go through this exercise, like, what things literally cannot wait an hour or two? And there ends up being very few in your typical office, right?
Wow.
Almost nothing.
Well, Maura, we gave a lot of information to the listener or the viewer if you're watching this on social media. Before I ask you where people can go to find out more about you, because I know people, it was like listening, like drinking from a fire hose, listening to you. It's incredible. What is one piece of information that you want to lead them with if they miss everything else you talked about, which I hope they don't, but if they only got one piece of information, what is that one nugget that you want people to make sure they walk away from this episode with?
Yeah, I think that people are frazzled and exhausted, and they feel like the world has such high expectations and have to be so responsive and they have to be on their devices. And so the one thing that I really want to drive home is that exhaustion is, for not everyone, but for many people, especially my clients who tend to be office professionals, right? For those folks, for the most part, exhaustion is optional. And you get to decide whether or not you are distracted, whether or not you feel frazzled and flustered and stressed. You can control your environment and you can control your technology, and then your habits start to change so that you can control your attention. And then that brings so much peace of mind. It is 100%, whether or not your attention is stolen is 100% up to you.
Wow. I love that. You've got several books. You've got a website. Where do you want people to go to find out more about how you can help them and your books and whatnot?
Yeah, my website certainly has everything, maurathomas.com, but there is one page, maurathomas.com/free-resources, free-resources. And there's a control your tech guide. There's a work-life balance, reverse burnout plan. There's some free courses and things. There's discussion guides for all the books. So that's a really great place to start. maurathomas.com/free-resources.
Okay. I want to thank you for being on the show today. It has been very enlightening. I learned something. And like I always tell people, podcast hosts have people on the show to get a mini coaching session, and we just put it out to the world so everybody else benefits from it as well. Folks, don't forget, go to Maura's website, and don't forget to go to my website, mrproductivity.com. Sign up for my free email newsletter. Get some free training from me. You can get a win. Training from Mr. Productivity and training from Maura. Maura, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mark.